Hello, I'm Francis Seeley from Enfield Climate Action Forum and also GlobalNet 21. And I'm recording this during the time of the pandemic of coronavirus. And it's a crisis that's facing us all. But in this particular video webinar, we want to look at the other crisis that's affecting all of us at the moment and will for the rest of this century. And that's the crisis of climate change. And we want to look at some of the solutions there are where we need to adapt to climate change and also mitigate some of its effects. So we hope to do a series of videos around solutions. And in this particular video, we want to look at one particular area, and that's the vital role of housing, because they play a significant role in creating carbon emissions. We know, for example, that the built environment contributes around 40% of the UK's total carbon footprint, and that's quite a huge amount. And to deal with that would make a really significant contribution to reducing the carbon footprint. We also know that the energy in our homes accounts for something like 14% of total UK emissions. And indeed, it's a lot worse in some boroughs. The borough in which I live in North London, in Enfield, 44% of emissions come from housing. Now, that's not their fault. They've inherited an older stock of housing, Edwardian 1930 houses, that were not as well insulated as modern housing. So they have a real problem on their hands, as do many other local authorities. Now, how do we build? That's the question. How do we build housing that will be carbon neutral in the coming years? Houses that do not let heating out as many of the older houses do. Now, we need to look at two things. We need to look at how we approach new build and create housing with a standard that keeps our carbon footprint as low as possible. And we have to look at how we retrofit older housing as well. But in this particular video, we want to look at new build, and some of the principles that we're talking about will apply to retrofitting as well. In the area of housing, there are standards that are set up that local authorities have to abide by. And there are also voluntary standards, and one of those is a Passivhaus standard. Now, this is a standard that's becoming more popular across the world. It started in Germany and has grown quite significantly, and it's a standard which is probably the most stringent, but very, very possible to do in the whole of the housing building area. And that's something we want to look at today. The standard which reduces the building's carbon emissions is the standard that should be applied by most local authorities, housing associations, and private developers in the future. A standard that reduces the ecological footprint quite significantly. So what is the Passivhaus standard? Let's look at it very briefly. If we look at this video now, we'll get a very quick glimpse of what that standard is.
Passivhaus explained in 90 seconds. Does your house have a heater in the basement or maybe a fireplace? Probably also a central air conditioner or maybe a window unit. Did you ever wonder if it was necessary? In 1991, a physicist in Austria, Dr. Feist, built the first passive house. Here's what he did. 1. Proper insulation. It's just like wearing the right winter jacket, it also doesn't need a heater. 2. No air leakages. There should be no holes, small or large, to let hot air out of the house. 3. No thermal bridges. A thermal bridge is like a road for heating energy in which warmth can travel right through your walls. As a matter of fact, most of our houses have thermal highways in our walls where heat can easily travel to the outside. Plus, the house needs proper windows most of the time with triple pane glass. It needs to be oriented properly so the sun can heat it in the winter and shade is provided in the summer. And it uses an HRV, a device that provides the inside with fresh air without letting the heat out. Add all these things up and it turns out your house doesn't need a heater or air conditioner. So where does the heat come from? A passive house needs 90% less energy, and that can easily be supplied by your body heat, the sun, your appliances, light bulbs, and even your TV. This saves you a lot of money on your heating bill and helps preserve the environment. Did we make it in 90 seconds?
You bet we did.
Okay, so we've seen in a very quick and amusing way what the Passive House standard is and all of what is involved in developing houses on that particular standard. We know that Passive House is driven by air quality and comfort as the two guiding principles that drives it. And also we know that there are a number of other principles that are integral to reducing heating demand, because the whole idea of passive housing is to actually have a system of housing that does not rely on fossil fuels, but relies totally or almost totally on renewables. And it has a number of principles, like you can see here: catch the sun, airtight construction, heavy insulation, high efficiency windows and doors, heat recovery and ventilation, solar water heating, and efficient air conditioning, not just heating, but air conditioning as well. Well, let's look at the passive housing standard in a little more detail and what it involves in its construction by looking at this video now.
Hey everyone, in this video we're going to learn about the 5 main building techniques used to design a super energy efficient passive house. Passive house is a building standard that's used to design and build homes to be more energy efficient than a conventional building. They do this by adding extra insulation in the walls, creating a sealed layer around the building, and preventing any heat from escaping, and a whole lot more. We're here at BCIT's High Performance Building Lab, which is a new hands-on learning space that was created to train BC tradespeople on green building techniques. We're about to meet up with Sandra and Alex, who are 2 brilliant people who are also very passionate and well educated in green buildings, and they're going to tell us how all this works.
The Passivhaus standard actually can reduce your energy consumption for heating demand by up to 90%. It's that much. So think about what you get, right? You get an extremely healthy building. Yeah, that's usually the part that people don't really, you can't put that into monetary value, but you do get a very healthy, comfortable building that has impact on your physical health, but also on your mental health. The other one is obviously your return of investment on your energy savings. So really, again, depending on where you are and what your energy costs are, it's a no-brainer. The costs that you obviously have up front that you can't deny is you have more insulation, you have better performing windows. But in terms of labor, the upfront premium would be somewhere in between 3 to 10%, depending on where you are. Yeah, more than conventional construction.
I believe climate change is real, and I really think we should do something about it. It's the first time that I've seen something that I think can make a huge difference. It's also the first time that I've seen something that I understand. Everything else is so complex that unless you have the perfect storm, it will not work. And I've seen that again and again and again in the buildings I've worked in the last 8 years. So what gets me really excited about this is that Passive House is simple.
When we talk about a building envelope, that basically means the walls, the roof, the floor, the doors, and the windows. Right? So everything that kind of encloses the building area volume is called the building envelope. When it comes to the wall, in general, we have 5 layers that are really important in any kind of wall assembly, not only passive house walls. We see several assemblies that you can use in passive house construction. This one shows the water shedding layer here. Then this wood fiber board is the water resistive barrier. Then you see some blown in cellulose fill in here between some normal 2x10 wood studs. The air barrier on this one is actually this wood fiber board taped. So when you tape the wood fiber board, it can become your air barrier. And then you can see here is an OSB layer, it's oriented strand board. If this is taped, is actually in this case your vapor retarder. And then in this wall assembly we have what they call a service cavity. So that's another 2x4 layer, also filled with insulation. not here, but in reality. The service layer makes a lot of sense to have because then you don't have to penetrate your vapor retarder anymore when you kind of do your installations. So this is a really recommended wall assembly. You see that the wall is fairly thick. Yeah, so this is part of the Passivhaus concept where we focus on the envelope first, passive part of buildings. Yeah, so we have a super thick insulation. So one thing I hear a lot, and I want to shed some light on, is that a lot of people think I'm gonna build an airtight house, I'm gonna sit in a plastic bag, and it's terrifying. That's exactly what I thought when I built my first passive house for myself. Yeah, I thought I'm gonna sit in a plastic bag. Plus, they think you can't open the windows. Yeah, so there's two things in there that are actually false. You can always open your windows. You just don't have to, and you shouldn't during the heating period. And you will not find the need once you live in it, because you have the heat recovery ventilation system. But when it comes to the air tightness and your wall assembly and air barrier, don't think of it as a plastic bag. Think of it as Gore-Tex. Yeah, you're actually creating a breathable wall assembly. The envelope gets to that point, and it gets so good that we actually lose our heating system. We don't have a conventional heating system in a passive house. All we have is our heat recovery ventilation system plus a minimum of heat supply somewhere, 15 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. For a normal single family house, you could achieve that with a hairdryer. One baseboard heater somewhere in your house is sufficient for heating. So we want to control the airflow in a passive house building envelope to control heat energy loss, to control unwanted heat gain, and to control infiltration of pollutants. And therefore, we actually do need a continuous air barrier around the building. In here, there is different membranes most likely, and then to connect all these pieces, we usually use high-performing tapes. We do air tightness testing with this equipment. This is called the blower door test. In simple terms, what it is a pressurization and depressurization test of the entire building. And you take one opening, in this case it's a door, we took out the door, to install the equipment, and it comes with a fan and it comes with a pressure gauge. So you can put in all your settings. You put in the area of the building, you put in the volume of the building, and then when you pressurize your building, you pretty much blow air into the building. And then to find leaks, if your blower door test doesn't come out to 0.6 or better, you just go around the seams. Yeah, you could sometimes you can feel it behind the seams. Or the first thing you usually check is you kind of go around the windows. And sometimes you can feel the leaks. It's easier to detect the leaks just by hand on the inside. When it's cold outside, warmer inside, it's easier to feel. Sometimes you can use smoke machines to detect leaks. That works quite well. If you do so, inform your fire department before. Okay. They come because it can be big. In simple terms, what a thermal bridge does, it actually creates a pathway for the energy and the heat, which is the energy, to travel through the envelope from the inside to the outside. It's a continuous path for energy to go out of the building. So we heat our buildings, and right away it keeps on going out. So it's a huge factor for heat loss. So to deal with the thermal bridging effect of the actual studs in the wall assembly, whenever you have two layers of insulation and not one big fat wall, like here we have the main layer and then we have the surface cavity, if you do it right, the actual stud that's within this wall assembly and the stud that is used for the surface cavity, they are offset. Yeah? So you don't have that continuous thermal bridge, but it's offset, so it's interrupted, and it's not a thermal bridge anymore. Ventilation has to happen for various reasons. Three of the major ones would be smells, air pollutants, and humidity. And humidity for occupant comfort, and the other one would be protecting the structure from moisture. In a passive house, we use a ventilation system with heat recovery ventilation. So we typically use an HRV system, which means we use controlled ventilation. So we don't just randomly open our windows, which pretty much means heat loss, uncontrolled heat loss, but we have an HRV unit that has very low energy consumption to run the fans, and it has to have 75% heat recovery ventilation rate as a minimum. So this is a very common heat recovery ventilation unit. So the way these heat recovery ventilation units work is they have a cross-flow heat exchanger. This is the actual core, this is the actual heat exchanger. It's as simple as that. Supplier comes in here, extractor comes in there, and in this core the energy gets exchanged. So this is pretty much the entire mechanical system that you will find in your house. It's kind of, if it's a house, obviously bigger ones we have bigger ones for multi-residential buildings or for commercial buildings. When you think about windows, have you ever thought about how incredible windows actually are in terms of all the functions they actually fulfill, which is pretty much everything a normal wall assembly fulfills, which is mainly it's a water shedding surface, it's a water resistive barrier, it's an air barrier, it's a vapor barrier, and it's insulating. So all that in one piece of element, plus the window is also the only element in our wall assembly that's not only about heat loss, but also for heat gain. So it's a fairly involved piece of equipment, really. Orientation of the window with the right performance and the right size is really important. So south windows are the best on our side of the earth. East and west not that great. Because the sun's really low and goes into the building really deep, so that has a big overheating potential. North-facing windows obviously are not really about heat gain, they're all about heat loss because we don't have sun in the north. The window frame is the weakest part in our entire building envelope in terms of heat loss, which is why in passive house construction we tend to over-insulate the frame as much as we can.
Thanks for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed learning more about these green building techniques with us. We'll put a link to the BCIT High Performance Building Lab in the description of this video if you want to find out more about what's happening here.
Okay, so that's given us some idea of what lies behind the Passive House standard, and we've looked at the construction and what's involved in that. But what's happening in the rest of the UK? Well, building started back in about 2009, and by 2017-18, considerable number of houses have been built, and with double that amount in the pipeline. And since that time, many more houses have been built on that particular standard, and that's really encouraging. We know that, for example, in Bristol and Glasgow and Plymouth, as well as a number of other areas, there are developments based on the Passive House standard, and some of them are really, really impressive. And perhaps one of the most impressive of all is the one in Norwich, in a place called Goldsmith Street, where they've developed something like 100 plus houses based upon the Passive House standard. And that's not only impressive in terms of the carbon emissions that have been reduced by that build, but also in the architecture. Indeed, this particular development won the Sterling Prize through the Royal Institute of British Architects for this development. So it is quite an impressive development, and we can look at that and see how it developed in this video here.
We wanted a really aspirational scheme that could potentially sort of set a landmark and spread out across Norwich. So we ran a REBA competition. About 105 practices actually bid for it, and they were right across the world. So we had some from Japan, Holland, and what won it was the recreation of the terrace streets. And so that's why Michael Richards came to actually win the scheme.
So we were inspired by the Golden Triangle, an area of Norwich just over the road, quite dense, but very popular. Much loved. Like the Golden Triangle, the streets here are 14 metres wide and the backs are 14 metres.
There were some concerns perhaps about traffic going through, so that was all built into the design to slow traffic down.
You can make fabulous places by looking at the landscaping in between. What it does is it really enhances the scheme and linking it through to existing properties as well.
I love the brickwork. It's just lovely. Plants, trees, paths, it's all set out really nicely.
Even the materials, a lot of people say walking down the street it's like being in Holland.
And we thought of the flats at the end of the terraces as kind of large houses which just happen to have flats in.
We wanted people to have some of their own space, so whether it be a garden or in one of those fabulous flats, they've got balconies.
Well, it's just lovely. I can have friends round, cook food, want to see a bit of life going on. There's a bit of nature as well.
We said those 3-storey block of flats, could we do it with no communal area so everyone has their own front entrance?
Whether they be in a flat or a house, every resident has their own front door which is unique to them. It's their own colour even. 4 out of 5 of the habitable rooms in a 2-bedroom house face south. The front gardens are designed intentionally to be quite livable.
People doing different things in their gardens, children out playing. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic, and it's what we'd hoped for.
You quite often go over that bit and play, don't you?
Yeah,
on the green
I
and
go
that.
over on the green, take these two over. I play out very safe.
We're literally dead in the middle of everything, aren't we?
Yeah.
Nice area in general.
Oh, here comes the other ones.
All the houses, as well as having back gardens, also have access to a kind of shared ginnel. And that ginnel is intentionally thought of as a place for small children to meet.
I'm a painter and decorator. I mainly miscoated pretty much every single property here. I've been in everyone's house. That's Nevaeh, our little girl. She's 3. She's living the dream.
It's lovely. We come out here near enough every evening. All the kids play up and down all the time. Scooters, bikes. We've had water fights out here, haven't we?
Yeah, it's lovely.
It feels like you're on holiday.
It's lovely when you come out here and you see the children playing up the back alleys, knowing that they're really safe because of the gated areas.
We spoke to a lot more people out the back here through their kids playing out here and our little girl playing out here.
And having a nice house, it's nice to make it look nice as well. And getting one, you want to look after it well, so.
Yeah.
All the houses have a really lovely timber staircase, timber handrail, which leads you up to a super large landing, which is big enough for a study area or even a spare bed.
It's nice because if one of us is bathing her and the other one could just sit on the sofa, it's just nice that you've got that area to do that with as well.
The original scheme was a soul again scheme, and we said, well, that kind of works for Passivhaus. Could you just make it Passivhaus? You know, just a sort of an easy thing for them to do. But they really embraced it as well. We brought on side Warm, who are our Passivhaus designers, and actually the real collaborative process to actually make this happen.
Well, we're treble glazed and we've got air heating, which is superb. They're always warm when you walk in, even when you haven't got the heating on. Should cut down on a lot of your heating costs throughout the year.
It's just been confirmed to us that this is the biggest Passivhaus social housing development in the UK. So we've got a lot to be proud of.
We procured the architects under a traditional contract.
We're being paid to ensure that not only is everything drawn correctly and specified correctly, but actually we have an opportunity to make sure it happens on site, which is very unusual now.
They kept full control over instructions and costs and elements of the design that were sacrosanct to all of us.
The building work and the architectural design, I do like it. It is
modern.
Yeah, it's modern, very modern.
Overall costs are around £220 a square foot. Construction costs is around £185 a square foot. When we speak to local authorities from London, they can't do anything for less than £300, £350 a square foot. Some local authorities in the north, they're thinking, oh, that's a bit expensive. So it's really interesting when you speak to different people.
It feels amazing to come back here after designing this in 2008 originally. Built beautifully, people living in it happily.
One of the big lessons is local authorities can do it. If you give them the freedoms and flexibilities to do it, they will actually deliver. And if government wants to deliver 300,000 homes a year, local authorities have got to be a key part of that development.
There's no reason why this can't be emulated elsewhere around the country.
Yeah, I think
I'd like to be here forever now. I'd like to think we would be.
I think I don't say die here, but Yeah, sorry. Yes, I think I'll be here for a very long while actually. It's such a lovely place.
Already there's such a sense of community, which is what we'd hoped for.
Absolutely.
You know, good quality housing for all. It's just exciting and we're all very proud of it.
There should be more of these about. Makes the world a happy place, doesn't it?
Okay, so you can see that that is really, really an impressive development in Norwich, one that gives comfort to the people who live there, a pleasant environment, and also creates a system of build that reduces the carbon footprint. But it's not only there, of course, that build is happening, and in London it's happening as well. For example, Agar Grove in Camden is a major development where there are lots of houses being built on the Passivhaus standard. But then we have to ask, what's happening in the rest of London? And if you look at the map here and those blue houses, you can see the spread of Passivhaus development in London. There's quite a lot in the centre, some in the south. In Enfield, where I live, in other parts of North London, unfortunately, there is not many developments of that kind. There may be developments in the offing, but there aren't any builds at the moment. I think where I live in Enfield, there's private development that uses that standard, but I don't think the local authority has done that yet. And that's a great shame because many local authorities do have major projects like Enfield does. They also have major regeneration projects like Enfield does, where I live, one called Meridian Waters. None of them, I believe, are based on the Passivhaus standard. And it's important, really, that local authorities look at that as the gold standard for the future. Now, if you're a community or if you are a councillor, I think it's really important to ask your local authority whether their housing development and regeneration plans are Passivhaus standard or not. As I said, in my area, I don't think they are. But it's important to ask, first of all, whether they are or they're not. And if they're not, then to ask whether the development and the regeneration plans they have, how they compare with their Passivhaus standard in terms of carbon emissions. And then also to ask again what future plans your local authority has and what certification they're going for. And are they going for the Passivhaus standard? And if not, why not? Now, those things are really important. And if you want to get help on this, and there is a lot of help available, then the Passivhaus Trust is a place to go to. It has a lot of information. It has a lot of case studies of good practice. And so it's well worth looking at it. You only have to Google Passivhaus Trust and you'll find their site straight away. So do that if you want to find more information about it. So what we tried to do in this video is look at how housing plays a major role in carbon emissions and how by developing a certain standard, we can reduce that dramatically. And not only reduce carbon emissions, but create greater comfort for the people who live in their homes and help them with their budget as well, because as we've seen, passive housing development can reduce bills for heating by something like 90%. So that's quite significant. So I think it's important for the future to look at this standard and to look at how we can use it to make a major contribution in tackling climate change. In other words, to make housing a part of the solution and not the problem. Anyhow, thank you for watching this. We hope to follow this up with perhaps more discussions on the Passivhaus standard, as well as looking at other issues around climate change as well. So thank you, and I'm glad you joined us.